What's up, everyone? If you're looking to implement a code block in your Next.js front end, you've come to the right place. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a code field with a language selector using Payload CMS and render it with text highlighting using Prism React Renderer. If you want the code I use in this video, there's a link to the repo in the description. Now, let's dive in. In this video, I'm building a code field that will allow editors to put examples in a block for things like blog posts, tutorials, and documentation. I want to include several different languages to choose from. This field will render the code as an IDE would, highlighted according to the language and easy to read. I'll also want to include a file name for the field so what file the editor is writing about is completely clear. This field should also have a button that allows users to copy the code to their clipboard to be used in their own project. First, we'll need to create a new directory in our blocks called code. So I'm going to go to our block directory, create a new directory, and call it code. And within this, we're going to start with a new config.ts file. In this file, we're going to import our type block from payload. And then we can export our constant called code, which will be of type block. And we want our slug to be code. We'll want an interface name called code block, so we can change how our types generate for the block. And then we'll need our required fields array. We'll have our first field be a name called file name, and this will be type text. Below this, we will create a new language field, which will be of type select, and we'll include options here. And our options property is going to be an array of objects. Now, I know that Prism React Renderer doesn't support every language out of the box, so I'm going to be very selective in which languages I use, but all that I use in this video are supported. So the first one is going to be our label of TypeScript and a value of TypeScript. We're also going to include TSX as an option. And the reason for that is because the highlighting rules are different. And the same is going to be true for JavaScript. So we'll include both JavaScript and JSX. We'll also add another label for HTML, another one for CSS. We'll also include JSON. And finally, we will include one for Python just for good measure. However, we are modern web developers and we use JavaScript, so our default value will be TypeScript since most of what I'm going to include in this code block is going to be TypeScript code. Now we can set up our code field and name it code. So we can add another field with the name of code, and we will have the type be code. We will not include a label, so we can set label to false, but this will be required. And that's it for the block. So let's generate our types. We're going to end our development server here and do payload generate types. And then we can start with the client side of this component by creating a new file within the same directory called component.client.tsx. Now, within this file, we know it's going to be a client component, so we will use the useClient directive. And then we need to install our Prism React Renderer. So I can use npm add Prism React Renderer. Now that this is installed, we'll need to import two things from Prism React Renderer. The first one is highlight, and the second one is themes. Highlight is the component that will handle all the highlighting rules for us. Themes will allow us to set the highlighting theme we want to use, if any. This includes things like VS Light, VS Dark, Dracula, and more. We'll then need React from React, and then we can set our type of props to be code, string, language, string, and then finally file name, string. File name and language can be optional. Code must be required. I'll then export a new constant called code, which will take the React functional component type with props, and then we can pass in an arrow function. We'll open up the function, but first we will set our props to be code, language with the default of an empty string, and then our file name. If there is no code, we can just return null, because nothing needs to be returned. Otherwise, we need to return our highlight component. Our highlight component will need our language, it'll need the code, and it'll also need the theme, which I'm going to use from our themes, the VS Dark. So first things first, we can open up a curly brace and then pass in an arrow function, and we'll open up a set of parentheses for that function. Within this function, we need our get line props, our get token props, and our tokens. And then within the parentheses, we need a pre-tag. Now the pre-tag is a pre-formatted HTML element that returns text as it would be in a written HTML file. So white space is captured exactly as it's written. So now we can pass in our tokens and map through them and take our line item and I as index. Within this, we can pass in a div that takes a key of I, and then we can get line props and pass in our class name, which will be table row, and our line item. Within this div, we'll need a span, which will be our row number, so we can just use our index plus 1 to return that row number. And then we need our actual code, which is from our token array. First, I'll create a span, and then we're going to map through our line item and pull out the token and the key. Then we'll render a span for each token with the key of key. And then we can pass in all of our get token props from our token. And now we can style everything. So we'll come back up to our pre element up here and pass in the class name, where we'll have BG gray 950 with a padding left and right of 1 rem. We'll have a padding bottom of 2 rem. We'll have extra small text. We'll round the edges a medium amount. Overflow X will be auto, and I'm going to include text wrap, though you don't need to. Next up is our row number that we need to style, so we will include a class name of table cell, select none, text right, text white, and we'll have it be an opacity of 25%. And then our span that contains our line.map will have a class name of table cell, and then padding left of 1 rem. Next, we'll create our copy button. So first, we're going to go to our code directory and add a new file called copybutton.tsx. And in this file, it's again going to be a client component, so we'll use the useClient directive. And then I want 2 icons from Lucid React here. The first one is our copy icon from Lucid React, and then our clipboard check. We'll also import useState from React, as well as React. And then one other thing I want to do is provide a toast as feedback to the user for interacting with this button. So first, I need to install Sonner by running npm add Sonner, and then we can import toast from Sonner. Then I need to export a function called copyButton, which is going to take a few things here. But first, we'll just set up the function. The first thing is we will have our code. Then we'll have a language, which we will default to TypeScript. And then we need our file name. Each of these are going to have types. So our code is going to be of type string. Our language, which will be optional, will also be a string. And our file name, also optional, will be a string. We'll then set a useState hook up called copied. And the default state will be false. Now I want to create a function that handles our copy status. So I'll create a function called update copy status and open the function and check if copied is false. We can set copied to true by using a function. Then we can use a toast to say code was copied to the clipboard, and then set a timeout function to set copied back to false after 5 seconds. Now I can return a div that includes a paragraph for our file name, as well as a button, which will contain another div that's going to include our language and our clipboard check, as well as our copy icon. Now back up to my file name. I only want this to show up if a file name does exist, because that is optional. The same is true for language. We only want that to show up if the language prop exists. And now for clipboard check and the copy icon, we want these to be checked first if copied is true. If it is, we can return our clipboard check, but if not, we can return our copy icon. Now, when copied is true, we'll want to change the language text to say something like copied. So we can keep our language check here, but also check that copied is false. If it is, we can return our language, but otherwise, let's just return the text copied. For our button, we can add a few things here. First is our onClick, which is going to be an async function, which will await Navigator to write text to the clipboard, and that text is going to be code, and then we can update our copy status. We will disable the button if copied is true, because we don't want people to keep clicking on the button while the timeout is going. And now we can start adding styles. So we'll start with our icons, since those will be the same. So we'll set a class name for each of them, which will be stroke emerald 50, a height of 1 rem and a width of 1 rem. Now we'll move up to our container div here, which will have a class name of flex, a gap of 0.5 rem, items center, and then we're going to check if copied is false. If it is, we can return opacity 100, which is default. Otherwise, we can just return opacity 50. And this will make the text look duller, so people think that the text is disabled. And then up for our button, we will include a class name that will be flex, margin top and bottom of 1 rem, a gap of 1 rem, and then we'll check if copied is false. If it is, we'll return our cursor pointer, but if it is true, we will say cursor is not allowed. And then finally, in our parent div here, we will pass in some classes, which will be width full, text emerald 50 with the opacity set to 75%. We will do display flex, and then we will check if there's a file name. If there is, we can justify content between. Otherwise, we can justify end. And then we'll want to include our font sans. So it comes back as sans serif font. And then we can do our items center, flex, wrap, and then padding top and bottom of 0.5 rem. That's it for the button. Now we can add this copy button to our component.client.tsx. And first, we're going to import this button from copy button and then add it to below our opening pre-tag. So I can add copy button right here, which will take our code, our language, and our file name. Next up, we'll add our client component to a server component that we can then use in our block and RichText renderers. Before we do that though, if you're finding this video helpful, please check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel. Give this video a thumbs up and consider signing up for my newsletter as well. Your engagement with this video helps facilitate the growth of the channel. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to it. We're going to create a component.tsx file in my code directory. And in this file, we're going to import React from React. We'll import our code from our component.client.tsx file. And then we're going to export a new type called code block props. Now we're exporting this so we can use it in our RichText renderer. We'll include our code, which will be a string and is required, our language, which is optional and is a string, our block type, which is required and is code, and then our file name, which is again optional and is a string. Now I need another type called props, which I can set equal to our code block props and use an intersection type to add our class name of type string to these props. Now let's export a constant called code block and set it equal to a React functional component type with props, and then pass in an arrow function. The props for this arrow function is going to be class name, code, language, and file name. Within this, we will return our div, and we'll style as we go for this one, because we're just going to add our class name as an array and filter through it and only return values that are true and join them together with a blank space. So we always return a valid class name and then our margin left and right of 4. Within this div, we will return our code, which will have our code, language, and file name. And so one last thing here in component.tsx, I see that block type got marked as optional by my code completion, so I just need to remove that so I don't run into type errors later on. We then need to add one more thing to make our toasts work, and that's the component that displays the toasts, which is called a toaster. We're going to go to our layout.tsx file on our front end. In our layout.tsx file, we're going to import toaster from Sonner, and then in our closing body tag here, we'll just include a toaster as well. Now let's set up our block and rich text renderers. First, we'll go to our page config, so page config.ts, and then we're going to add the code block to our blocks field here called content. So we can just add code, and this will be from our code config. And then we'll also go to our content with media block config and add our blocks feature here and include our blocks. And we're only going to include our code from, again, our code config. Now, again, we'll run payload generate types. To add this block to our block renderer, we're going to go to our blocks index file, and we're going to import our code block as code block props. And we'll also import our code block from our component. Then in our block components constant, we can include our code set as code block. And then we can leave everything else here the same. Now we can add this to our rich text renderer by going to components, rich text converters index, and then importing our code block from our block component, as well as our code block props. We then need to add this to our node types with code block props. And now the last thing we need to do is add our code block, which is going to take our node and pass it into our code block, which is just going to take a class name, which will be column start2, and then the rest of our node fields. So now I can save this and we can see what this looks like. Now when I save this, I can spin up my development server, and then we can go to my admin panel. And in my admin panel, we can go to pages, and we'll go to our portfolio, where I'm going to add a new code block, and I'll drag it up here to the top. We'll have a file name that we will just call converters/index.tsx, and we're going to copy all of this code into our code file here and publish our changes. Now, if I go to my front end and type in portfolio, we can see our code file here exactly as we planned. Now, of course, we may want to use this in our rich text, which we did enable by then creating another new block, which I'll add below, and this will be a content with media block. And so now within our content with media, I can add this is a code block, and then add our code block in here. We'll have a file name that we'll call globals.css. We'll set the language to be CSS. Then we can go to our globals.css up here, and we'll just include our H1 and H2, paste that in, publish our changes, and then go to refresh. And we can now see that we have a code block here, and an image would be over here if we add it. So I'll go ahead and add that with my headshot, refresh, and now we can see when I click on the button, we see a toast pop up here at the bottom, and our text changes to copied, and I'm not able to click it anymore. Now we have a full working code block that tells me what the file name is, the language we're in, and a button that allows me to copy to my clipboard and user feedback that the code is copied to the clipboard. And that's it. Adding a code block is as simple as defining the config and creating a handful of components for the front end. Now you can use this code block anywhere you might need one in your project. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with others who might also find it useful. Check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and receiving notifications so you never miss when I release more content about Payload CMS, Next.js, Tailwind CSS, and more. Also, consider joining my newsletter to stay up to date with modern web dev news from across multiple platforms. There's a link for that in the description. If you have suggestions or questions, please leave those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.